Hey, how's the weather up there? Is the oxygen a little thinner? Yeah, have you played basketball? If these are things you've heard before, then this video is all about you. The most critical setup point for a tall rider is the handlebars, and it's not about using risers. If you think you need risers, think again, because the problem is with risers, not only does it raise the bars, but it also brings them closer to the rider because they're at an angle. The issue isn't height. If you look at Travis here, you'll see he has no problem reaching the bars, and this is on a stock motorcycle. But also you'll see that there's a very small gap between where his hip, where his ankle is, and where his wrists are. This makes him less stable. This is why you struggle, because it's like riding around, reaching down and holding your ankles. If you're not a tall rider and you're watching this, just reach down, grab your ankles, and then walk around, and you'll know exactly what it feels like for Travis to ride a tall motorcycle. So our goal here is to get more depth, and you'll see how limited that distance is. Let me show what it looks like on a better setup. The most significant difference between Travis's Africa Twin and my GS is the handlebars. And when you put risers on, as I mentioned, it rises it up and closer to you. The real key here is you want more distance from a rider. If we could make a bike perfect for you as a tall rider, we would hack the frame, stretch it out, weld it back together, and then it would be ideal. It's pretty expensive to do though. In this case, what we're looking at is a better stable posture. If you see where the ankles are, the hip, and then the distance to the handlebars, that opens up that triangle. It gives them a stronger base. If this just had risers, he would be all the way back up here. He's higher, and you'll see the bars are actually closer to him, which is what he looks like more on his bike, and that makes him less stable. You want to come down forward onto the bars. This is the proper posture you're looking for, and it allows you to be more mobile and more stable. If you're not able to get the flatter bars that are going to give you this distance, there's one adjustment you can make that will help you, or at least while you're waiting for the parts to come in. Let's go back to his Africa Twin. Much better. Now I feel a little closer to you. If you have a stock machine, and you can see immediately on his Africa Twin, we've closed that gap again. And that's what causes that lack of stability and why you always feel less stable as a taller rider. As a riding technique tip, you're gonna sit down more often than other riders that may be shorter. And the reason is if you're below, if the index point for your knees or your legs is below, you have nothing to rest against. You're constantly fighting the weather, which means if you're not riding so fast that you need that extra visibility you get from height, if you're not dealing with technical environments, just sit down. There is one minor adjustment we can do here. If we're moving forward, this is where things really get messy. If you're going up a hill, if you're riding aggressively or fast, we end up with the shoulder leading the hand. This is when you begin a negative stability stance. There's not a lot you can do when you're at this height and with this handlebar setup, except you can adjust the levers. What you'll notice is we have a nice L shape on his wrist. What we're gonna do is over-rotate the controls so that we straighten out the wrist, and now you're on top of the handlebars. The levers are now down below, and that provides better stability. It's not perfect, but it's definitely improvement. Walking in on the bike is not done at the knees, it's done at the feet and the ankles. You look at Travis's boot here, he's pulled all the way in against the frame, and his leg is connected all the way from the ankle all the way up to just below the knee. And for many of you, if you're very tall or if you have a bike that sits below the knee, much like if you're riding a dirt bike, This is the only thing that locks you on, that keeps you in contact. So stop focusing on the knee and start focusing on locking in at the base. Also, if you've been told you need to ride on the ball of your foot, that's not necessarily true. It's a way in a position. There's nothing wrong with center foot. And one of the points that Travis came away with when we were doing our experimenting was that he felt more stable on the midfoot because he didn't have as many places to index, and that allowed him to move around and feel more stable. From a posture standpoint, the issue isn't when you're just riding down the road sitting or even when you're standing. The real challenge comes when you're going downhill or you need to lighten the front end. And in this case, what Travis is doing is not holding onto the handlebar, he's actually wedging and locking on to the seat. By keeping those legs in tight to the bike, when he slips back, that natural shape of the seat wedges into the legs, and this allows him to take his hands off and then stay perfectly relaxed. When you move forward, the challenge is going to be that he needs a place to index, but this is very smooth. He's going to slip around on the tank, and then he's wearing a street bias pant, which means there's no grip built to the inside of the pant. So as he comes forward, he's going to index fairly high on that tank. You'll see the shoulders are in front of the wrist. This is why it's so important that you get whatever additional locking point is possible. Travis is indexing the tank here, up on the bulb. Most of us, when we buy tech spec or any kind of a grip material, it's cut and tailor-made to fit down here. In this case, you'll probably need to get a universal stomp grip or a sheet of some sort of traction that you can put up higher on the tank. Find out where you're actually indexing. That means you have to take your bike out, try these techniques, and find out, make note of that so you can make a proper modification. Drop pegs are definitely an easy way to get a little extra space. Not only does it drop the amount of bend in the knee, but it also lowers your leg, so you might be better at getting an index point higher on the bike with your knee. This one not only drops down, but it also moves back. And if you have really big feet, that can really help you out, giving extra space to where that shifter is. For some models and brands, you can buy an aftermarket shifter as well that'll allow you to extend it and give you some extra space. I talk a lot about locking in at the heels or the lower leg, but I'm not talking about squeezing and pulling the leg in. I'm talking about having pressure to the inside. If you tilt the boot just slightly, so it's up against the frame, and then stand down on the boot, it'll press into the frame and lock you in where you need to be. The idea is to use as little energy as possible, so you have maximum control, minimal fatigue. Bonus tip. Tall riders have a tendency to want to go with tall shields because you're getting behind them and you want to drop off all that wind noise and turbulence. The reality is the taller the shield, the more risky it is. If I raise that shield up, this is a stock shield, if he has any problems where he comes forward, best case he breaks the shield, worst case he guillotines himself. One recommendation, something that you may want to consider, is taking your stock shield and trimming it down. You can always paint the backside of the shield with, I use bed liner, or you can use paint. That way it's resistant, but it looks good. And that will clean up your airspace when you're riding at speed. You won't be behind the shield, but you won't have a lot of turbulent air. And then your helmet will probably do a really good job of quieting things down. As you know, a stock shield is exactly wrong if you're well above 6 feet. Those are my best tips if you're superhuman tall. What I learned from spending an entire day using Travis as my own personal little lab rat was that many of the techniques that I've recommended over the years are even more important than I realized. And there were a few things that I picked up along the way that I'm going to be using again in the future. But this isn't about me. I have a standard inseam of about 32 inches. I'm 6 foot tall. Most of these bikes fit me very, very well right out of the dealership. The real hero here, the real topic, the person that's going to make your riding better is Travis, and we've spent a couple days together now. What were your biggest takeaways? What are your best recommendations?
I think the first thing I would start off with is the most important for me was bike setup. Absolutely incredible how important it is. when I was on my bike, you know, I felt like I've just been riding it for a long time. I've got many miles on it, BDRs, lots of time. I felt more comfortable swapping over to Brett's bike within, you know, 50 seconds on riding, because there was a couple things that were different. He had the handlebars 3 inches farther forward, which gave me an incredible amount of comfort to do it in there. The way that the bike is set up down on the foot pegs is a little bit different as well, so I felt more comfortable bringing my feet in, which leads me to my next point. The most amazing technique change for me was, instead of riding out with my feet tucked out a little ways like I always have, I brought them in and put them right up against the side of the bike, gripping with my ankles, not worrying as much about my knees. By being able to spend on this section of my calves, I felt a lot more in control, and when I was going up or down the hill, when I had those like little anxious moments, I felt really fine. I was good, and I was able to grip and not worry so much about it. So that was the most important for me, those two.
Fantastic. Well, I'm hoping we at least covered one thing that's going to make a big difference in your riding or your bike setup. One of the other things that Travis told me when we were finished with our first day of lab work and experimenting was he had never really gone out and just focused and experimented on the techniques that we've talked about. That's my last and final tip for you. Don't just take this video, watch it, and think that you've got everything dialed in and go out on a ride or take a BDR or travel across the continent, wherever you are in the world, whatever your big ride is. Take your bike out and spend a dedicated day figuring out what works for you, what setup points work, which ones don't, which techniques work best for you, which ones don't. You're going to be very different. Travis has about a 36-inch inseam. Depending how you're built, you could be taller than him and have less inseam. You could be shorter than him and have a whole lot more inseam. If you're riding a KTM like the 890, they sit down below the knee, even for a rider like me. That's going to make a big difference. So don't just assume that these are all just blanket across the board. Find out what works for you, experiment, practice, and get better and have a better time riding and enjoying what we do, what we love, our passion. Thank you for watching the channel. Make sure you guys hit like, leave some comments down below. Let us know what points made a difference for you after you've had a chance to play with it. Share your tips that we didn't include here. What have you done as a tall rider that works for you, so we can share it for others and that they can read those comments. Thanks again, guys. See you next time.